This is Ray, and before I get started, I just wanted to ask if you could subscribe to the Five State Revival YouTube page. You can do it at the bottom right corner of this video, or you can go to the channel and there will be a subscription button. And why am I passionate about the Sermon on the Mount? In Jeff's video, he did 4 benefits to living the Sermon on the Mount, or 4 benefits as to why it's valuable to read and teach the Sermon on the Mount. So I'm going to give you 5. I could not narrow it down to 4. And so I've narrowed it down to 5 for this video just to keep it as short as possible. So to answer the question, why am I passionate about the Sermon on the Mount? I'm passionate about Jesus, and I'm passionate about the things that he says. That's really important to me. And so whatever it is that he says and he teaches, that is what gets the highest place in my heart as far as my value system. So the Sermon on the Mount is where Jesus gives what I think is the clearest teaching for citizens of the kingdom to live in the way that God describes as both great and beautiful. As far as Matthew 5:19, where he says, you will be called great if you teach, if you do and you teach these things. So you can read that right there in Matthew 5:19 in the Sermon on the Mount. And so I just really value Jesus's words, and I want to obey him because I love him, right? And if we love him, we obey him. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate of the Sermon on the Mount. Another reason that I'm passionate about it is when I really started to take more of a deeper dive into the sermon and not just study it, but read it, pray it, allow it to work through my inner man. It really has so much transforming power. The words that Jesus taught are more dynamic than just the basic instructions that they seemed like they could be. You know, for instance, like, you shouldn't commit adultery, you shouldn't murder. Like, those things seem obvious on the front end, which can make the sermon possibly easy to dismiss. And there are some more dynamic teachings in there that can make it complicated, which can also make it easy to dismiss the sermon. And so when you begin to see the ideas and how they work together and what Jesus was actually teaching and his purpose for teaching them, you begin to apply them to your life. And it gives you the spirit of what I think is of wisdom and understanding, according to what the words say in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, or the way Mike Bickle likes to put it, is experiential understanding, right? It's like, it's more than just words on a page to me now. I see what Jesus said. I've been praying it over my life, and now I'm starting to see the benefit of it work out in my life as far as the transformation of my inner man. I also think this is Jesus's like discipleship mode, right? Sermon on the Mount. I want to be a disciple of Jesus, meaning I want to follow him, I want to obey him, I want to do what he says when he says it. Super important. And so I think that this is not the only place where Jesus is discipling the church or just the disciples within the story, but I think it's one of the most clear places where he's teaching, hey, guys, this is what my heart looks like. He's not giving us a teaching that's like separated from who he is, and then asking us to hold that standard. And then if we fail, we're failures. We just can't do it. He's actually saying, hey, this is my heart. I'm telling you what it looks like. Okay. I'm inviting you to say yes for your heart to look like this, right? Obey me, walk in these things. Your heart will look like my heart. It's going to be hard. These are hard teachings, right? But I am committed. I'm committed to helping you do it, right? So it isn't a standard that we live up to so that we can be pleasing to God. It's actually an invitation into relationship with him, where he's saying, I'm just telling you what my heart looks like. 8 Beatitudes. That's just one facet of my heart. And I'm saying, I want your heart to be transformed in that way. And if you say yes to that, I'm going to help you do it, right? And he helps us do that by the Holy Spirit. We don't do that in our own strength or by our own might. We submit ourselves, right, in the place of prayer and humility, and we say, I can't do it. It's impossible for me to do it, right? And so, and I've heard other teachings on the Sermon on the Mount, which maybe had helped me dismiss it early on, where it was like, well, Jesus was teaching these hard teachings in the Sermon on the Mount to let you know that the standard was so high that you could never meet it. And so since you can never meet it, you're actually excused from meeting it And that's how we're going to define the grace of God. You don't have to meet it because God's grace releases you from having to meet the standard. But I don't think that that's a clear representation of the teaching. I don't think it's a clear representation of Jesus's intention. And I don't think it's a clear representation of how powerful the Holy Spirit is when he's working and operating in our lives. So I think that the grace of God enables us, it empowers us, it emboldens us to do what we could not do on our own through the power of the Holy Spirit to obey what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. No, we can't do it on our own. Yes, the standard is incredibly high, but with the Holy Spirit, we have the power to do it. He empowers us to do it, not in our own strength, his power and his strength. And that is the grace of God. We are empowered to do what Jesus exhorts us to do. More of my passion for this teaching came when I began to see the fruit of it working out in my inner man being transformed. When that started to happen, I began to see the wisdom in what Jesus was saying and the benefit and constantly meditating on the words within the sermon and praying the words and thanking the Holy Spirit for guiding me and helping me and just making it a prayer instead of an intellectual assignment that I had to like just memorize the whole thing and know the whole thing, though that could be beneficial. But actually using it as a way to relate to God and to Jesus and to fellowship with the Holy Spirit and the Word, that I never grow bored of it. The information never gets stagnant. It never gets stale to me. I can read the same words over and over, and I just say, thank you, Holy Spirit. Thank you for empowering me to do this. Thank you for helping me overcome anger. Thank you for helping me overcome lust. You're so good. You're so powerful, right? And that's what he wants to do in our hearts. He's a liberator, right? The 5 things that I think are beneficial about the Sermon on the Mount when we apply it to our lives and we take it to heart, right? We're going to listen to Jesus's teaching, and we're going to take it to heart, okay? Benefit number 1 is that the sermon helps us to walk in constant fellowship with the Holy Spirit. I talked about that just a little bit before, but there's context to the entire sermon that applies to the more mundane sides of our life and how we relate to human beings and how we relate to one another and how our inner man works. And so whatever difficulty I'm going through or whatever success I'm going through, I can typically find a place within the sermon that is a good meditation point where I can ask for wisdom. Jesus, what did you mean here? What am I not seeing that I could see more clearly, right? How can I get that clearer eye that you talk about in Matthew 7, right? So for instance, like if I'm arguing with my wife or I'm like disappointed in myself or I'm having a disagreement with a friend, like what do I want my response to be like? How do I make my response like Jesus's response? And so you go back to like you can look at the Beatitudes, for instance, in this particular instance and say like, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy, right? So then I just thank him for his mercy over my life. And then I ask the Holy Spirit and I say, Holy Spirit, help me to become like Jesus. Help me to become merciful in my heart so that when I'm arguing with my wife or I'm having a disagreement with my wife, my responses aren't sharp. They're not quick. They're not to bite and to devour. They're not to win the argument. They're not to even be understood. It's actually to find common ground and relationship and reconciliation. Just the thing that gets the relationship or keeps the relationship in a healthy place. So help me to be merciful. Help me to understand. I'm disagreeing, but I want to have understanding, right? And so it puts that value in our heart. Oh, I have to actually value mercy. I can't be the one that wins everything. I can't always be the one that's right. Even if I am the one that's right, do I have the ability to give preference to the other person and allow them space to operate in their understanding, right? And so it really helps you die to that part of yourself that has to be right all the time and has to win every argument. And so, Lord, help me to be merciful, right? I don't want to be this defensive person that just is backbiting and constantly, behind the scenes hard to get along with. I want the Holy Spirit, mark my heart with mercy. When people encounter me, when people have conversations with me, when people have hard conversations with me, let them see your mercy through my heart, whether a believer or an unbeliever, and let it be a testimony unto who you are, right? So that we can speak that truth with power instead of just defensiveness and a big personality. Okay. So that's just like one example of many that we can pull, right? I'm not looking where it says, oh, Jesus said, be merciful and you'll get mercy. So I guess I'm obligated to do that. No, I'm turning that into a prayer. I'm asking the Holy Spirit, mark my heart, transform me. I actually want to be like this. I don't just want it to be a practice or a facade that I put up. I want it to be for real. I want it to be deep. I want it to be in my heart, right? This is who I want to be. And I need you to help me do this daily. This isn't something you're going to give me today and it's going to be automatic tomorrow. I need this every day. Jesus, help me, right? Transform my inner man. Now, ultimately, what he's doing, Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount, is he's preparing us for the judgment seat of Christ. That is ultimately what is happening. And so it really helps put your life in perspective when you know that, because then you're working your way backward. You're not like, oh, is today good or is today bad? You're looking for the day that you stand before him, and you're working your way back, knowing that the choices you're making are leading to that meeting, right? And if you're thinking of it always in that context, you're gonna respond different. You're gonna spend your money different. You're gonna choose your friends differently. You're gonna treat your friends differently. You'll think of your church differently. You'll think of everything through the context of like, I am gonna stand before him and be held to account of how I conducted my life. And that is what the Sermon on the Mount is helping us do, to conduct our life in a way that is pleasing to him, but is also what's considered to being on the narrow way, right? It's hard. It is hard because there's so much that we're blind to, and there's so much that we need to like resist and get off of us. And it takes the Holy Spirit to do it. And it takes his grace and it takes his mercy to do it. John 4:24. This is benefit number 2. It says, for God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth, right? And so it just gives us a guideline for how to think in worship and in conversations, right? It doesn't say that we just worship in spirit, because if we just worship in spirit, I can worship and I feel the connection and I feel good about it and I'm having fellowship with the Holy Spirit and it's amazing and I feel his presence. That's awesome. But there's the in truth side of it, right? There's a submission of my mind to the truth of my condition in my life, the truth of who he is. And so I want to submit to those truths, right? I come to him on his terms is what I'm trying to say. I don't come to him on my own terms. So in truth, he wants us to come in truth. And I have found many times when I'm worshiping, whether it's in church or in my house, and I start meditating on the truths that are in the Sermon on the Mount, my heart begins to burn within me as I'm thinking through like the dynamic things that Jesus was teaching, and I'm worshiping and I'm praying him, and I can feel the transformation happening. But it's not just my spirit having an ooey gooey moment. It's my mind is connecting with truth as my spirit is worshiping him, right? And so it's in spirit and it's in truth. It's worshiping him on his terms, right? Benefit number 3, we are clearly rewarded when we value and teach others to value Jesus' teaching, right? He says it in Matthew 5:19. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments, meaning everything he's teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, whoever relaxes them, meaning dismisses or says, yeah, you don't really, it's important, but it's not that important. But if he relaxes these commandments and teaches others to do the same, he will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't say he will be out of the kingdom of heaven. It says he'll be in the kingdom, but he'll actually be called least. But whoever does them and teaches them, they will be called great in the kingdom of heaven, right? And so in this age, you might not be called great. You might teach what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, and you might experience a lot of ridicule and pushback. But according to Jesus' standard, he says, if you teach these things and you teach others and you inspire others to obey me, right, and be empowered by the Holy Spirit to obey me in this area, I will call you great. And that's what he calls greatness, right? It takes humility and meekness, right? We're going to lay our lives down for him. We're not taking up our own life. And that's a lot of what the Sermon on the Mount is helping us work through, is laying down our pride. Benefit number 4, it produces a life with singular focus, right? It contextualizes our success. I talked about this a little bit earlier. It contextualizes our success and our failures in this age. So it says Matthew 6:22 through 23. It says, the eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body is full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body is full of darkness, right? So it's giving us a singular eye. How do we live? And Jesus is going to go on and tell us how to live liberated from anxiety. And he gives a couple of practical components there. And I don't want to get into that right now too much. But the point is he's saying you got to have a singular focus, a singular vision for your life. And I think that it is the judgment seat of Christ. We look to live our lives according to standing before him. And when we live that way, there isn't a lot that can get us off the path, right? I'm going to spend my money the way that he tells me to spend my money. I'm going to spend my time the way he tells me to spend my time, and so on and so forth. Okay. Benefit number 5. It's the pathway to building a life on a solid foundation that can stand at the judgment seat of Christ. I just talked about the judgment seat of Christ, but Jesus says at the very end of in Matthew 7, he says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And when the rain fell and the floods came and the wind blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock, right? That's Jesus. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, he's like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. And the idea here is that our whole lives are going to be measured, right? When we stand before Jesus. And our works are going to be exposed for how good they are and for how bad they are. Right? And if our works are full of, I lived for myself and I didn't allow my inner man to be transformed by the Holy Spirit and Jesus and his word, and I just lived according to my own wisdom, Jesus said, that's a bad life. That is not a life with a singular focus. That is not a life submitted to me or my teachings. That is not a life of a disciple. That is somebody who lived for themselves selfishly. And that house will fall. He's like, but the person who lives with that singular focus and they live for me and they live according to my teachings, and that is the solid foundation. I will call that life great according to Matthew 5:19. And so again, the exhortation isn't in the Sermon on the Mount, look at the standard, obey the standard, or you're a failure. It's engage the Holy Spirit in every area of this sermon and allow it to mark your heart, touch you in places in your heart that you've not been touched before. Allow the Holy Spirit to go down deep in you and prepare you. He's preparing you to stand before Jesus. And this is one of the ways through this teaching that he's going to do it. So I can't wait to unpack the rest of this sermon. I'm excited to go through it with you guys and with Jeff. And I hope you enjoyed this.